Almost 75% of our agency staff works to some degree remotely. And now we have 48% who are working full time remote. And this is with practically no dip in productivity. And in most cases, we've actually had an increase in productivity. We call this concept work from anywhere. And I'm about to show you right now how you can make work from anywhere actually work for your agency. Hey folks, Jim Schubert. Welcome to Agents Growth Academy. I am your headmaster. I hope you are ready to grow big or go home. If you are wanting to improve your agency's branding, marketing, or agency operations, you are in the right place. Today, we're going to talk about how to make remote work, or what we call work from anywhere, actually work for your agency. So that's the agency operations side of things. Before we get into that, I want to talk to you real quick about one company that helps our agency work super efficient, and that's ePay Policy. They are the simplest way for insurance agents to collect payments. Most agencies have between 0 and 1 accounting staff as part of their employee base, and that makes it difficult for you to collect payments. We have reduced our average agency bill collection from 5 to 7 days down to less than 24 hours. They've just launched something called Checkmate, which basically allows ePay customers to route checks for daily collection, batching, and processing with all those check details in your ePay dashboard, so that you don't actually have to collect those checks, and they take care of all that for you. It's no extra monthly fee, just a flat fee per check. Check out ePay Policy in the show notes. I got a special link for you there. So, how to make remote work or work from anywhere actually work for your agency. There's a few things that you need to think about beforehand. Number one, you've got to ask yourself why. Why do you want to make work from anywhere, or WFA, work for your agency? What I would encourage you to do is do not be reactionary about this. You may have employees who are begging to work remotely. That's fine. I get it. I mean, it's kind of expected in a lot of agencies. To be candid, I'm actually surprised that there are a lot of insurance agencies that I'm talking to who are still just completely resisting this concept. Work from anywhere obviously was really ramped up during the pandemic because we had to do it. But what we realized in our agency was, you know what? It's actually kind of working. So you need to ask yourself, though, why? Why? Okay. How will this fit into your agency's already established long-term vision? Now, here's a hot tip. If you don't have a long-term vision for your agency, first of all, don't be embarrassed. We didn't a few years ago. I'll be candid with you, okay? We had somebody help us figure out what that was. Here's what you need to do if you don't have that long-term vision. Write down what your agency looks like 10 years from now. Everything that comes to mind, write it down. It's kind of that concept from Stephen Covey, begin with the end in mind. Write down everything that comes to mind. Our mission in our agency is to help people thrive by providing peace of mind. It's not to become the largest insurance agency in Alpharetta, Georgia, or even the largest agency in Georgia, period. So remote workers fit into our strategy of helping people thrive by providing peace of mind, because it doesn't matter where they're located. It doesn't alter our mission of helping people thrive. Okay. So think real hard about why. Ask yourself that question. Why do I want to consider embracing work from anywhere? Number two, create systems of accountability. This is a huge one. Okay. Start off with roles and responsibilities. If you don't already have roles and responsibilities for every position in your company, take a minute take a few minutes and write those down. What is everything that each position is responsible for? And here's a hot tip. No other position should also be responsible for that, unless there's an asterisk that says, for instance, if doing certificates of insurance is an account manager's responsibility, but it could also be delegated to an assistant account manager, that's okay. But just make sure that you notate that. We call this turning agreements into expectations. And why is this so important for work from anywhere? Because you don't have direct on-site, eyes on the people oversight, right? So you've got to have agreements. At one point in time, you all agreed, both of you agreed, that this list of roles and responsibilities is what you are responsible for. We agree on that. And then that becomes our expectation of you as the employee. No matter whether someone is working remotely or in your office, this is still super important. So make sure you've got those roles and responsibilities down. That's number one of creating systems of accountability. Create an accountability chart. A lot of people call this an organization chart. Organization charts don't tend to take into consideration the actual roles and responsibilities and the people. An accountability chart is literally showing who is accountable to whom in a chart. And then it lists out the actual roles and responsibilities on that chart. And only then should you or do you need to put the names and the faces of the people into that chart. So make sure that you have that, and make sure it is in a place that all people can see it. We use software in our organization that actually has this chart built in so that all of our employees, whether they're in our offices or whether they're working remote, can see that chart so that there's no question of, well, that's not my job. That's not my responsibility. No, you can look on the roles and responsibilities that are on the accountability chart and see what is your lane or someone else's lane. Another way of creating systems of accountability is to have a regular pace of reviewing measurables. If you don't have measurables for each of your roles in your company, that's something that you need to make sure that are set up. Everyone should have at least one number that they're responsible for. Even your receptionist should have a number. Our receptionist, her number is 0, right? That's 0 calls going to voicemail if we can help it, right? So everyone should have a number. Lastly, on creating systems of accountability is have a regular pace of employee feedback loops. Now, loops is the key word there. It's not just giving feedback to the employee. It's them also giving feedback to their manager. That creates a whole nother level of accountability, doesn't it? When the manager knows that they're going to get reviewed on a certain set of criteria, it really turns it into a conversation, which is why we call it quarterly conversations. Now, hot tip, secret here. These may sound familiar to you if you've ever read the book Traction, or if you are currently or know someone who is running what's called EOS in their organization. Check out the book Traction by Gino Wickman. I'm going to go ahead and have the podcast team put a link to that book in the show notes for you, because it's something that's really helped us build better accountability in our agency. So make sure that you have a way of providing those feedback loops on a regular basis, whether it's twice a year, quarterly. We try to do quarterly, and it's just a regular pace. So that'll help make sure that accountability is in place. Number 3, develop a remote work agreement that addresses a few things, okay? Policies and procedures, first of all. Make sure that all normal rules still apply to anyone who is working from anywhere. In addition, if there are specific procedures and policies that affect only people who work remotely, make sure that you address that there. Eligibility, productivity, and expectations. That's another one. Expectations like, what if the power goes out? Do I have to take PTO if I'm working from home? These are questions that we didn't really consider until it started happening. So make sure that you put things in the remote work agreement in there. And if you want to ask me questions about it, feel free. Drop a note in LinkedIn. Make a comment wherever you're watching this or listening to this. Another thing to have in a remote work agreement is safety, equipment, and security. So make sure you're addressing things like maintaining a clean and safe work environment. Yes, that actually still matters. You still have workers' comp responsibility for anyone who is working for your organization. So do your part to make sure that they have the safest and cleanest work environment that they can have, and make sure that they agree to that in writing and sign it in this remote work agreement. And then guess what? File that to make sure that you have those agreements that were turned into expectations for down the road. Security and company data, that is definitely a big one. You might want to make sure that you address how those things are supposed to be kept secure. So whether they're remoting into another location or a server, or whether they have a laptop that you've issued them, make sure that you address anything related to security around that. BYO computer, bring your own computer, or are you going to provide one? Make sure that you're addressing specifically. And if you do it differently for different people, make sure you have a way to indicate what equipment that you have given them, including down to the serial number, so that when and if you need to get it back, you have that documented. And finally, for remote work agreement, things you want to have in there, minimum system requirements. So if they are bringing their own computer to work, and that's generally how we do it with our remote staff, is they bring their own computer and then they remote into a server. Okay. So you got to make sure that they have minimum system requirements. And here's a hot tip. During the interview process with anyone who's going to be potentially working from anywhere for your company, make sure that you actually have them show you, share their screen and show you the system specs for the computer that they have, so you can put your eyes on it and identify and say, yep, they meet those. Okay. And also test on Zoom. Make sure there's no lag. Make sure they can share their screen and there's no lag. Make sure anything they're going to be doing within your organization, whether they're training someone or just attending a regular meeting via Zoom, that they can actually do it and have good quality. Because the last thing you want to do is be spending gobs and gobs of time trying to solve IT issues. That will create much bigger headache than you ever imagined by having people who don't meet the minimum system requirements. All right, number 4 for how to make work from anywhere work for your agency. Set expectations about a distraction-free work environment and enforce them. That's the key. You know that you can't ask certain things during an employment interview, right? Like you can't ask about children. Hey, do you have kids that are at home? You can't ask that, right? You can't ask about, does your spouse work from home? Is that going to be? You can't ask things like that. You know this. So we used to ask in a different way, what's your family care plan, right? Meaning like, if you had kids, do you have, a plan for them to be at school and then have care afterwards so that they're not running around in the background and causing noise and chaos like kids do? Or if they're caring for some, like an elderly parent in the house, is that going to be distracting? We used to do that. We have changed that. And now what we ask is, do you have a dedicated workspace which allows you to work undistracted for the whole workday, including being on camera in meetings or on phone calls? I'm going to read that again because that is super important. If you're driving, make sure that you go back, or you're walking, go back and write this down later. Do you have a dedicated workspace which allows you to work undistracted for the whole workday, including being on camera in meetings or on phone calls? Okay, why do we ask it that way? Well, I told you about what you can't ask, but specifically in that, we are making sure that they have a place that they can work the entire day, that it's not distracted. And we've had it, come up where people have kids and those kids come home from school. They do every day, right? So what happens around 3:00, 3:30 or 4, that last couple of hours of the day becomes super distracting. And we can tell when people are not answering their phones like they normally do throughout the rest of the workday, or they're not responding to emails or whatever it is. Or we've even called and we can hear like all manner of noise in the background, like TV and kids and things like that. Also, like, I get that people have pets, right? This is not, we're not discriminating against anybody who has a pet. I have a dog and a cat. I think my cat, well, she was sitting on the couch behind me, but she's not anymore. But animals who are incessantly making noise is an issue, right? If a dog randomly barks, it's fine. Like, the mailman's going to come, the dog's going to bark. It is what it is. But if the animal is incessantly making noise, that is a problem. And like I said at the beginning of this section, you've got to be able to enforce this. So make sure that your managers are comfortable having those conversations with people. And I think this, I say this goes without saying, but let's just talk about the way to address real quick employee issues. If you're not used to doing it this way, think about this. Keep it to the facts. What was it? Columbo was just the facts, ma'am, right? So say, this is the third time that I've called you this week and I hear the TV on in the background. That seems to me to be distracting. What you're not saying is, you're not making a judgment call. You're not saying, I don't think you're getting your work done because I can hear the TV in the background. Well, maybe they can get their work done, but if you pose it as a fact and then let them know how it makes you feel, they can't argue with your feelings, right? I feel like you're being distracted by that, and then give them a chance to go back and rebut that. This isn't an episode about how to handle, HR issues, but maybe I'll do a different video on that. But just think about that when you're enforcing those expectations about working in a distraction-free work environment. Okay, next is care for your remote workers. Now, I know that sounds obvious and almost silly, but it's easy to get into a groove of getting your own work done or having your managers get their own work done and then forgetting about people, right? When people aren't there physically, it is kind of, in a sense, out of sight, out of mind. So here's some tips to care for your remote workers. Keep them in the loop with a regular pace of meetings with their peers, okay? It's one thing for you to one-on-one have conversations with them. They need to be able to engage with their peers in meetings. So if you don't have a regular pace for meetings, I would highly encourage you to develop one. Again, going back to the book Traction, that's something that you learn how to do through that. And it's called a level 10 meeting. Won't go into why it's called that or anything, but it is on a regular pace. Okay. So have a regular pace. Reach out to them individually on a regular basis as well. Right. And that goes whether you are their direct manager or if you're the owner of the company or principal and maybe you're not their direct manager. Also, it might be a good idea to occasionally check in with everyone in your company on an individual basis. You would be surprised how far that goes, especially if you're a larger organization like ours. I've really surprised and shocked people. Most people think like, oh my gosh, I've done something wrong. Why is the boss calling? Why is the owner calling? But because that's kind of the initial reaction, and then you spend just a couple of minutes saying, hey, just want to check in. Just want to see how things are going. One great question to ask during that, by the way, is, is there anything in my blind spot? Anything that I should be aware of that, maybe we're not thinking about to make your experience with our agency better? Whoa, mind-blowing, asking them for help in making your agency better. Yes, very good concept. I would highly recommend that you schedule it if you're the kind of person who's going to forget to check in with people. Ask their peers and managers to do the same, right? They're on a team generally. Make sure that you set the expectation with the team. Hey, I want you, actually our COO, he tells his team members that work with remote employees, like, I want you checking in with that person at least once a day. That's great. Going back to everybody has a number, right? That's one number. Check in with your remote peers at least once a day. Keeps them in the loop, makes them feel like they're part of the family. Involve them in company-wide activities in meetings. I think that goes without saying, but just to make sure we're on the same page. All these things combined together that I just mentioned are going to create a culture of belonging. Okay, a culture of belonging. So make sure that you're getting those things done. Finally, before you decide to embrace work from anywhere, I've got a few tips for you. Number one, know that it is hard to undo. So I know that sounds silly, but once you run down that road, it is very hard to undo, because once you've got people working remotely, it is darn near impossible to bring them back without some level of groaning and wailing and gnashing of teeth, right? And potentially having people leave because they know that they can find remote work elsewhere. So you have to be committed. That's why the first thing I talked about on this episode is ask yourself why you want to do this and does it fit in your vision? Because once you do it, it's really hard to undo. Number two tip is know how to respond to current in-office employees who are going to request to go full remote. Because once you let folks know, the first time you hire somebody remote, even if you haven't told the rest of your staff, they're going to know, right? And then they're going to ask, well, why can't I work remotely? My suggestion would be to actually poll your staff beforehand. We did this, and I'm so glad we did. We literally sent a Google form, like a poll, out to all of our staff and said, and this was shortly after the pandemic, after the pandemic, I fully recognize it's like, the disease itself is here to stay probably, but once we went back to the office full time or got back into the groove of things, we sent a poll and said, hey, raise your hand if you'd like to, number one, if you'd like to work remotely. First question. Number two, if you'd like to work remotely, how often would you like to do it? And then give them choices, right? Like 1 to 3 hours a week, like just do a range all the way up to, full-time remote. That'll give you a real clear understanding of what things are going to start to look like if you implement this. Okay. So poll people, because when we polled people, what we found was, and we broke it up, we have multiple locations. We broke it up by office, and I put all this in a spreadsheet, and I very quickly realized that our office in the Duluth, Georgia area, every single person raised their hand and said full-time remote. I think there was one person who said mostly remote, right? And so we actually had a lease coming up that was expiring. We're going to renew it. And we made the call. We talked to those people and said, hey, the lease is renewing. All of y'all are saying pretty much that you want to work remotely. Our thinking is that we're just going to close that physical office and then y'all will all work from home. So that's what ended up happening. So we're saving money on lease, but we still have the employees, right? So it can be a win-win-win all around if you're very transparent with your employees to begin with, right? So go into this eyes wide open for everybody. Ask other agencies who have embraced work from anywhere how it's going. And I would recommend asking it this way. Simply 2 questions. What's working? What's not working? Get answers to those questions, and it'll probably spur more questions for you. And finally, reach out to me. I am happy to answer any questions that you have about your agency's potential decision to embrace work from anywhere. I can tell you that it is a journey that I am very glad that we have undertaken. As I mentioned in another recent episode, The last 5 hires we've made have been out of state. We're in Georgia, and we have people now working in states like Missouri and Michigan and Ohio and North Carolina and all manner of Texas even, right? Thank goodness we're called Southern States Insurance, although now we have people in Michigan, like that kind of rules it out. No, but it's a wonderful thing because the people that we're bringing on are some of the most qualified and genuinely likable employees that we've hired in a long time. And I'm not saying that my legacy employees are not great employees. They're all wonderful people. But obviously, as any agency owner, agency manager goes through, you hire a certain number of people, and a certain number are going to attrit. They're not going to make it, right? And we're finding more consistently that we're hiring better quality people more consistently, and they're fitting in with our really good qualified legacy employees just as well as we've always had these people. So it's been a really, really rewarding journey to see how this is paying off, and all without having any really noticeable reduction in productivity, and like I said at the beginning, even increasing it. So let's recap a couple things. On your journey to, if you're going to make remote work or work from anywhere, actually work for your agency, number one, ask yourself why. Do that exercise where you're looking out 10 years and saying, does this fit in our vision? Number two, create systems of accountability. Number three, develop a remote work agreement that addresses all those things that I mentioned to make sure that you're going into it eyes wide open and everybody has expectations set. Speaking of that, number four, set expectations about a distraction-free work environment and enforce them. Number five, care for your remote workers. And number six, before you decide to embrace work from anywhere, ask some of the questions from people. Know that it's hard to undo, and just go into it eyes wide open. Folks, if this episode was helpful to you, meaningful for you, let me know in the comments of wherever you're listening to or watching this. But also, I would love if you would leave me an honest review. Sure, I would love it for it to be 5 stars, but candidly, I do want it to be honest. Leave me a review on Apple Podcasts, where this show is mostly consumed. I hope it's been helpful. Folks, until next time, grow big or go home.